As European language was brought to regions being colonized by European powers, people who spoke native languages in these colonized places were forced to adapt and speak English and French, among other European languages. This transition has had long-lasting effects on the way these colonized people and others understand the world, often impacting the ways traditions are or are not passed on. Both Ngugi wa Thiong'o's Decolonizing the Mind and the symposium Why Epistemic Decolonization grapple with the long-lasting effects of colonial linguistic alienation of the colonized, and subsequently highlight the necessity of acknowledging language while working towards decolonization. Seen specifically in Charlie's Country, an intolerance for minor native languages feeds very directly into the colonial power balance, placing the colonizer's language preference above the colonized group's language and culture. After closely analyzing these sources, I assert that meaningful and mindful translation, as well as the weaving of minor languages into more widely used languages in the spaces that they're used in, is the basis of decolonizing language and respecting the culture that is carried within it. Ngugi's Decolonizing the Mind tells us that when Uganda was colonized by English speakers, it only took so long for the official language of education to become English. Soon enough, the ability to speak and understand English was the main requirement to move up at all in the tiers of higher education. Schools, fellow students, and the colonial regime became critical of anyone who spoke anything but English, the new official vehicle and the magic formula to colonial elitism. This means that students were alienated from the things they may have learned in the language they spoke at home, and were made to believe that the only valuable knowledge they had was found in an English-based system of education. The imposition of language breaks the harmony previously existing between the African child and the language. By undervaluing native language, the colonial system also undervalues everything that is expressed solely in native languages: art, dances, religions, history, geography, education, orature, and literature. This undervaluing of native language is also seen in Charlie's Country, a movie following an Aboriginal Australian man. Police officers in the movie, who generally hold power over the Aboriginal population, explain how they cannot pronounce native names and insist on referring to the main character by the European name Charlie. This act asserts dominance over Charlie, as even his name is dictated by the colonizing power. Ngugi also describes a system of testing that allowed entry into higher levels of education as extremely Anglocentric. In order to pass these tests, a credit must be received in English, which is a grade better than just a simple pass, meaning a student could receive perfect scores on every section except for the English writing and would fail the entire test. This test, the Kenya African Preliminary Examination, was the determining factor in a child being selected to attend secondary school or not. This test weeds out children who do not speak or write English well, even if they have the highest distinctions in every other subject, leading exceptionally bright children to become blue-collar workers if they are not selected for secondary school based on a failed English exam. This system undermines the knowledge these children have and makes them feel as if it is not enough. The alienation of native language by means of a colonial education system or an otherwise imposition of foreign language undermines the philosophies, values, and ideals of a culture that formed and was formed by a native language. In Charlie's Country, there is a very poignant difference between how the police officers in charge view the weapons that Charlie sees as simply tools to hunt. Utilizing guns and a hunting spear, Charlie hunts animals as a means of sustenance, not for violence. The police officers who happen upon him while he is carrying these things explain that he's not allowed to possess dangerous weapons that could hurt people. There's a fundamental difference of understanding here in what a gun or a spear symbolizes and what the words gun and spear insinuate about the user's intent. This difference in understanding goes further than how objects are used. In the symposium, Why Epistemic Decolonization, Pascal Mongwini states, "The production of philosophical works has come to largely follow along colonial linguistic lines. Philosophies seem to be largely based on a shared long-term cultural experience and ways of looking at the world, and when expressed through an outsider's language would be changed in ways unimaginable unless the ideas were to be thoroughly examined in the language it was originally found in, not only in English. Since academic discourse surrounding philosophical ideas and cultural ideologies is done almost exclusively in a select few European and Arabic countries, philosophical ideas and insights produced on the continent therefore tend to remain locked in linguistic prisons, as Mangwini calls them, militating against dialogue and cross-fertilization of ideas. Africa, a continent still finding its new post-colonial, if there is such a thing, voice, is excluded from the open dialogue of ideology and philosophy due to the linguistic prisons brought to light in this symposium. Accurate and honest translation is highlighted as an important factor in allowing for new contribution to ongoing discussions on philosophy and cultural ideology by both Ngugi and Mangwini. Translation of philosophical texts into native languages allows for an understanding of these texts that can align and relate with previously held understandings of the world. Translations of texts written in minor native languages allow for an understanding of philosophies that have not yet been introduced into the ongoing academic dialogue. The necessity of this cross-fertilization comes from a need to decolonize the noble enterprise called philosophy, as Mangwini states, by examining philosophies and ideas that have been ignored for centuries due to their being written and expressed in minor languages. It is also worth thinking about how minor native languages can be woven into major languages, and how this could lead to the breakdown of a cultural hierarchy, effectively leveling the linguistic playing field. Native languages from colonized countries were conceived before colonialism impacted the areas they were spoken, meaning they could possibly convey ideas outside of the colonial ideal. I'm no expert on minor world languages, but it seems intuitive to me that languages spoken outside of the colonial context could help lead us towards decolonization. I hope this was a good introduction to the idea of decolonizing language, and I appreciate your time. Thanks for listening.